Good afternoon, everybody. Now, I normally tend to run around a bit, but I've been told not to move from this station by my boss over there. But actually, I couldn't have done anyway today because I wrenched my back this morning doing some housework. As somebody pointed out, probably the first time I've ever done any housework. Wasn't really that funny, honestly. It wouldn't hurt like hell. Anyway, I'm very glad to be here. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. I'm just going to see if I can turn that thing off, can I? No, I don't particularly want that either. Okay, do you want a double screen or do you want a single screen? Single is easier, isn't it? Can I turn that off? There we go. Okay, so I've called this session Maximize Your Day. I actually tried to do a webinar on Saturday last week, but I had complete technological failure. So I had to talk without my slides to an audience that I couldn't see. So I'm going to try and do a slightly better job of it today. It follows my usual Baobab rules. For those of you who don't know me, I am a consultant obstetric anaesthetist here. I'm also one of the associate deans for HEIW. I have an obsession really with performance and performance under pressure, which I've had for many years, a lot longer than just this particular pandemic. I've been a consultant here, I think, for about 24 years now. This is my 25th year. One of my younger colleagues said to me the other day, "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" I'm going, "How old do you think I am?" So this is a baobab. This is one of my favorite trees in the whole world, and I have this on my Twitter feed, whatever that is. I'm not encouraging you necessarily to follow me on Twitter, but I am trying to get some of the stuff that I find helpful out on that format. I've not really used it much before, so if you think it's useful, fine. If you think it's useless, please tell me. But the baobab is apparently structured like this because God was so unimpressed with it that he planted it upside down. He was so unimpressed with his bloated arrogance that he planted it upside down. So I use it as a daily reminder for me that arrogance in our jobs and in fact in our lives is a very dangerous thing to have. It's also to remind me of what I call the 90% rule of what I'm talking about today. And that is that 90% of what I'm telling you I think is correct. I just can't tell you which 90%. And the more I learn about topics like this, the more I realize actually 90% is probably a gross overestimate. Now, I run a course called MedTrim with a couple of quite exceptional people. One's an ex-Special Forces captain, the other is a professor of sports psychology. And what we've been looking at for the last 10 years is strategies to improve performance under pressure. And I'm going to give you a taster of some of that today in terms of how I maximize my day and also some feedback from them as to how strategies they use to maximize their day, particularly at a time like this. And it's based around this principle taken from the Declaration of Geneva, which you can see on the bottom there. And that is that I will attend to my own health well-being in order to provide care of the highest standard. And there is absolutely no doubt that we can't look after the patients that we're looking after unless we look after ourselves. So we have to look after ourselves first and foremost. This PDF is available. It's just been updated. If you can't get access to it, I'll email a copy directly to Adam. But what you can do with it is you can write your own well-being prescription. So that's a prescription form for those of you who haven't filled one in before. I was asked by a GP, is it a legal prescription form? And I'm going, very sort of weird people out there. But the variety of skills that you can learn, and you can perhaps put your own in that you find useful. As Adam said, use stuff that you find useful. One of the things I've found in supporting people, particularly in the last 20 years with performance issues, is that when they get stressed, they stop doing all the things that are good for them. It is quite bizarre. This is not a time to stop doing the things that are good for you. And I tend to one of the things I've learned over the years is if you can ask the right question, you can usually find the right answer. And this is a question I've encouraged many doctors over the years to ask themselves before initiating treatment on a patient. Anybody like to guess what you should ask yourself? Interestingly, it's the same question you should ask yourself before you go to work. Go on then.
Fit for duty.
Sorry?
Are you fit?
Are you fit? Not bad at all. This is mine. Do I actually know what I'm doing here? Because if I ask myself that question, then I'll at least find strategies to find the answers. But I think Fit for Duty would certainly fit into that. By the way, if you're interested in beautiful questions, this is a fantastic book. It's got nothing to do with medicine, but it will encourage you to perhaps think differently. So I'm going to introduce to you a concept and a philosophy based on how I've tried to live my life over the last 25 or 30 years as a medic. And the first is the 3 C's. So the first C is control what you can. Now, if you're an obstetric anaesthetist, in fact, I think most anaesthetists are really quite good at controlling things, but what they don't realize is they can't control everything. And for many years, I had to struggle with number 2, which is cope with what you can't. And I'm still struggling. I cannot control what's going on, but what I can control is me. And the last C, which is something I'm sad to say, I've only really learned in my 50s, is concentrate on what counts. And at the moment, I think it's giving us a lens. The current crisis is giving us a lens on that third C. So control what you can, cope with what you can't, and concentrate on what counts. So that's the philosophy. So the second thing I want to introduce you to is how your mind works. So if we look at this model here, and you mentioned bandwidth. Now, for us to function well, we have to make sure that our bandwidth is optimized. Now, for bandwidth, read working memory, also called the bottleneck of the mind, because it's a bottleneck between two things. It's a bottleneck between a skill, and I don't think it matters what the skill is, and your long-term memory. But the function of this skill is dependent on how you manage your bandwidth, i.e. your working memory, and what you put in your long-term memory. So in the 50s, a fellow called Miller looked specifically at this process, and he came up with a paper called the magical number 7. He said at any one moment in time, you can cope with 7 plus or minus 2 blobs of information. How many people think that's reasonable? Yeah, me neither. Because in fact, I've been asking people about this, and once they get to about 3 or 4 things, they have to forget one of the first thing to cope, to learn or be aware of a 5th thing. So in 2000, a fellow called Kahn said it's not 7, it's 4. Now, interestingly, something has happened to our brains in the last 50 years, which has made our working memory worse. Would anybody like to tell me what they think it is? And you're probably carrying one in your pocket. Okay, these have made us stupid. They also have other side effects, which I'll come to in a minute. Now, the problem with stress, which we're kind of under at the moment, is that our working memory decreases. And in fact, I used to say this as a joke, but I don't think it's so funny anymore. We become a binary unit. So we either do nothing, which is the classic rabbit in the headlights, which I'm seeing quite a lot of both in my patients and my staff. Or we do something, which is a classic fixation error. Or, as one of my colleagues did recently with the PPE process of preparing for a challenging patient, you run around with your hair on fire. And none of those responses are particularly helpful. Now, just to prove to you that you were probably distracted enough by this diagram, how many of you noticed that I changed the titles of each of these things on each of the last 3 slides? Anybody? So that just gives you an idea that your bandwidth is limited. I've got you to focus on one thing, and you're completely unaware of what's happening in the periphery of the field. So that's a summary of the model. So combining those 2 things, the 3 C's and the simplest model of the mind, is the way I approached my day. And what I'm going to do in a minute is I'm just going to go through a few strategies that I use both in my daily work, but what I've also done is I've asked a group of very high-performing individuals what they do in order to maximize their days, just to show you that we're all actually doing something active to try and cope with it.